Have you ever noticed how, no matter how much you achieve, there's still that little voice whispering, "You're not good enough?" What if I told you that voice isn't a flaw in your personality? It's actually a hidden habit your brain has trained itself to repeat every single day. Without you even realizing it? Most people think confidence is about being bold or fearless. But what if the real reason your confidence keeps disappearing has nothing to do with your abilities, and everything to do with the way your mind talks to itself when no one's watching? Here's the strange part. This habit doesn't feel harmful. In fact, it often disguises itself as something productive, something that makes you seem responsible, careful, even humble. But underneath it, it's quietly draining your emotional energy and rewiring your brain to doubt itself. So what exactly is this hidden habit that's killing your confidence? It's chronic self-comparison. That constant measuring of your life, your success, your looks, your intelligence against someone else's highlight reel. Every time you scroll through social media, every time you see someone doing better, your mind subtly says you're behind. And that message, repeated over and over, carves deep pathways in your brain. The human mind learns through repetition, so the more you feed it comparisons, the more it learns to feel inferior by default. Think about it. You wake up, grab your phone, and before you've even brushed your teeth, your brain has already been told that someone else is fitter, richer, happier, or more successful. That's not just social media, that's neuroscience. Your brain's reward system gets hijacked. Dopamine spikes when you see something exciting online, but instead of feeling inspired, your subconscious interprets it as loss. You see their gain as your failure. There's a famous study from the University of Michigan that found people who spent more time on social media reported lower life satisfaction and more feelings of envy within just 2 weeks. The psychology behind it is simple. Your brain can't help but compare. It's part of human evolution. Our ancestors compared themselves to others to understand their place in the tribe. It helped them survive. But in the modern world, where the comparison pool is billions of people deep, it's not survival, it's self-destruction. Let me tell you a story. Emma was a talented graphic designer who loved her work until she joined a few online design groups. Every day, she saw portfolios from people who seemed way more creative than her. Slowly, her excitement turned into anxiety. She started doubting her own designs, deleting projects before finishing them. Within months, she convinced herself she wasn't good enough and stopped sharing her work altogether. Her confidence didn't disappear overnight. It was drained one comparison at a time. But here's the real twist. Emma didn't need to stop comparing altogether. She just needed to change the direction of her comparisons. Instead of looking sideways at others, she started looking backward, at her own past self. Every time she improved even 1% from her last project, she celebrated it. Slowly, her brain relearned that progress, not perfection, is the real marker of success. Now let's go deeper. When you compare yourself to others, you're training your reticular activating system, the filter in your brain that decides what information to focus on, to notice your flaws. Over time, you literally become blind to your strengths. But when you shift your attention to your own growth, that same system starts spotting evidence that you are improving. That's when confidence stops being a performance and starts being a feeling. Another quick example, ever met someone who radiates quiet confidence? They're not loud, they're not showy, but they walk into a room and you can just tell they're comfortable in their own skin. That's not arrogance. That's self-trust built through micro-wins. They've learned to find validation not from external approval, but from internal progress. So how do you fix this hidden habit? Start by noticing it. Every time you catch yourself comparing, pause and ask, is this helping me grow or is it just making me feel small? Then, take that same energy and channel it inward. Track your own milestones, however small. Write them down. Reflect weekly. Teach your brain to seek proof of your progress, not proof of your shortcomings. And here's something powerful most people miss. Confidence isn't built by success. It's built by self-consistency. When your actions align with your values and you keep promises to yourself, your brain learns that you can be trusted. That trust is confidence. Have you ever caught yourself looking at someone else's life and thinking, why can't I be more like them? It might happen in the smallest moments, scrolling through Instagram and seeing someone your age already traveling the world, landing a dream job, buying a house, or looking effortlessly confident in every photo. You tell yourself you're just looking for inspiration, just checking in. But deep down, you feel that quiet sting, that silent thought that whispers, you're behind. What if I told you that this tiny, almost invisible thought is one of the most damaging psychological habits your brain has learned, and it's been killing your confidence from the inside out? Most of us think confidence is something you're either born with or something that grows when you achieve more. But psychology says otherwise. Confidence isn't an outcome. It's a process, a reflection of how your brain interprets your self-worth moment to moment. And one of the biggest forces shaping that interpretation is the habit of comparison. What's wild is that comparison itself isn't new. It's a natural part of being human. But somewhere between evolution and Instagram, between survival and social validation, comparison stopped being useful and started becoming toxic. It begins innocently. You might look at a coworker and think, they're so good at presenting, or see a friend who's fitter and think, I wish I had that kind of discipline. On the surface, these thoughts seem harmless, even motivating, but under the surface, your subconscious mind is logging data. Every comparison becomes a mental note that says, they're better, you're worse. You don't feel it right away, but it's there, stored like little pebbles in a jar. Over time, the jar fills up until your inner voice starts echoing those messages back to you in moments of stress, doubt, or failure. This hidden habit works silently because it hides behind logic. You tell yourself you're just being realistic, that you're setting high standards, that you just want to improve, but in truth, you're teaching your brain to use someone else's life as your measuring stick, and that's a game you'll never win. Because every time you measure, you forget something crucial. The variables aren't the same. The person you're comparing yourself to might have started years earlier, come from a completely different background, or face challenges you can't see. But your brain doesn't factor that in. It just notices the difference and translates it as inadequacy. There's a term in psychology called upward comparison. It's when you compare yourself to someone you perceive as better in some way. The human mind is wired to do this automatically. Our ancestors used comparison to figure out who had higher status, who was a better hunter, who could be trusted. It was an evolutionary tool that kept us safe within social hierarchies. But the same tool that once protected us now works against us in a modern world where our tribe has expanded to billions of people. The moment you open your phone, you're not comparing yourself to 10 people in your village. You're comparing yourself to the best moments of millions of strangers. And here's where the habit becomes lethal to your confidence. The more often you engage in self-comparison, the more your brain reinforces it as a default mode of thinking. The brain loves patterns. If you think a certain way repeatedly, neurons form pathways that make that thought easier and faster to access next time. It's like creating a shortcut. So the more often you scroll, observe, compare, and feel inferior, the more your brain learns that this is your normal. Eventually, you don't even need social media to trigger it. You start comparing unconsciously in real life, too. You walk into a meeting and immediately notice who's more articulate. You see someone laughing confidently across the room and wonder why you can't be like that. You hear a friend share good news and feel a subtle twist in your stomach. None of this means you're a bad person. It means your mind has been trained to evaluate your worth externally. And that right there is the hidden habit that kills confidence more effectively than any external failure ever could. One of the most fascinating things psychology teaches us is that your brain doesn't differentiate much between imagination and reality. So, when you see someone else achieving something and mentally place yourself below them, your body reacts as if you're actually losing something. Cortisol levels rise. Your nervous system goes into a low-grade stress state. You might not notice it consciously, but over time, your body begins associating others' success with your own inadequacy. You literally feel smaller, but it's not all your fault. The modern world is built to exploit this psychological bias. Companies, social media platforms, even advertising, they thrive on keeping you in a cycle of comparison and dissatisfaction. Every scroll is a subconscious reminder that you could be more fit, more successful, more beautiful, more productive. But more never ends, does it? Because there's always someone else doing something different. In your mind, hungry for belonging and validation, keeps chasing the next comparison like a moth, chasing light. Let's take a real-world story to bring this to life. Imagine two friends, Jake and Alex. Both are smart, creative, and ambitious. Jake spends his mornings journaling, reflecting on his growth, and setting goals based on his past performance. Alex, on the other hand, starts each morning scrolling through his phone, seeing other people's success stories and viral wins. Over time, Jake's confidence grows because his brain learns to associate progress with effort. Alex's confidence fades because his brain learns to associate progress with comparison. Same talent, different wiring. After a few years, Jake feels self-assured, grounded, and capable, while Alex constantly feels behind no matter how much he accomplishes. Now let's dig deeper into what's actually happening inside the brain when you fall into this comparison loop. Every time you compare yourself unfavorably, your brain's reward system, specifically the ventral striatum, registers a dip in perceived value. Think of it like a tiny self-esteem meter that drops each time you feel less than. Meanwhile, the amygdala, which processes emotion and threat, interprets this drop as a potential social danger. Because in evolutionary terms, being less valuable to the tribe meant lower survival chances. So your body triggers a subtle stress response, not full-blown panic, but just enough to make you uneasy. Here's the twist. That stress response becomes addictive. Your brain starts seeking it, not because it feels good, but because it's familiar. This is how self-comparison turns into a habit. A neurological feedback loop where discomfort reinforces attention, and attention reinforces discomfort. That's why sometimes, even when you know scrolling makes you feel worse, you can't stop. It's the same mechanism that drives other addictive behaviors, and the more you do it, the more your neural pathways strengthen around those patterns. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, works both for and against you. If you spend years practicing self-comparison, your brain becomes incredibly efficient at it. You start doing it automatically, without effort, even in contexts where it doesn't make sense. That's why people can feel inadequate even in situations where they're objectively doing well, because their mind has learned to search for evidence of inferiority, not success. Another fascinating psychological effect that plays into this is called the spotlight effect. It's the tendency to believe others are paying far more attention to your flaws and failures than they actually are. When you combine the spotlight effect with chronic comparison, you get a double blow. Not only do you feel like others are ahead, but you also overestimate how much they're judging you for being behind. The result is a constant state of mild social anxiety and self-consciousness, a silent erosion of self-trust. This brings us naturally to how social media amplifies the entire process. Social media isn't inherently evil. It connects, educates, entertains. But from a psychological perspective, it's a comparison machine. Every image, every post, every story is a data point for your subconscious to measure itself against. And here's the thing, and these aren't accurate data points. You're comparing your full, unfiltered life, every insecurity, every boring Tuesday, every failure, to someone else's highlight reel. Their curated, edited, filtered, best angle version of reality. It's like walking into a movie theater halfway through a film and assuming the character's current happiness is their whole story. You don't see the struggles, the messy drafts, the breakdowns before the breakthrough. But your brain doesn't know that. It processes the image, registers the success, and quietly asks, why don't I have that? In 2018, a study from the University of Pennsylvania found that reducing social media use to just 30 minutes a day significantly improved well-being and decreased feelings of loneliness and depression. That's not a coincidence. When you stop feeding your brain constant stimuli for comparison, it begins to reset. The dopamine spikes that once came from others' achievements start to fade, and you begin reconnecting with your own sense of self-worth. But here's what's tricky. Social media creates what psychologists call variable reward systems. It's the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. You don't know what you'll see when you open the app. Maybe a funny video, maybe a friend's milestone, maybe a viral success story. This unpredictability keeps you hooked. But with every scroll, you're subconsciously training your brain to measure worth externally again. There's also something called the illusion of proximity. Because social media shows you people your age in your field doing better, your brain assumes they're just like you, that their success should be equally attainable. But it doesn't see the hidden variables, timing, luck, privilege, support systems, or the 10,000 hours of work behind that one viral post. So you internalize their highlight as your inadequacy, and slowly, without realizing it, your confidence starts to depend on how you stack up against others rather than how you show up for yourself. Over time, this dynamic leads to what psychologists refer to as self-discrepancy theory. This theory suggests that emotional discomfort arises when there's a gap between your actual self, who you are, and your ideal self, who you think you should be. Social media widens this gap dramatically because it constantly bombards you with inflated ideals, bodies, lifestyles, achievements that don't reflect reality. The result? A chronic sense of falling short, even when you're objectively doing fine. There's also the emotional exhaustion factor. When your mind is constantly evaluating, comparing, and judging, it drains your mental bandwidth. You become less creative, less present, less resilient. Your confidence doesn't just shrink, it fatigues. You stop taking risks because deep down, you've taught yourself that you're unlikely to measure up anyway. And so, ironically, comparison, which starts as a desire to improve, ends up paralyzing growth altogether. Think about how often you've delayed something, applying for a job, posting your work, sharing your ideas, because you thought, there are already people better than me doing this. That thought feels rational, but it's actually the product of distorted comparison. It assumes that value is limited, that success is a zero-sum game where someone else's win means your loss. But human potential doesn't work that way. Confidence dies when we forget that. What's most tragic is that this hidden habit often disguises itself as humility. People say things like, I'm just being realistic, or I don't want to be overconfident. But there's a huge difference between humility and self-erasure. True humility acknowledges your limits while still believing in your worth. Chronic comparison, on the other hand, erases your individuality by forcing you to measure yourself through someone else's lens. Here's a story that illustrates this perfectly. Mia was an aspiring writer who loved crafting short stories. She'd share them on a small blog with a modest following. But one day she stumbled upon another writer her age who had gone viral. Overnight, that person had thousands of followers, book deals, and interviews. Mia compared herself relentlessly, and it crushed her. She convinced herself she wasn't talented enough, that she was too late, that her words didn't matter. So she stopped writing. Months later, she came across an old entry she had written years before, a piece about why she started writing in the first place. It reminded her that writing had once been her way of processing emotions, understanding the world, healing herself. That realization hit hard. She realized her passion had never been about fame or comparison. It was about expression. So she started again, quietly, just for herself. Ironically, that's when her work started resonating. When she stopped comparing, her authenticity returned, and with it, her confidence. That's the paradox. The more you chase confidence through comparison, the less you feel it. But when you focus inward, on your growth, your effort, your values, confidence emerges naturally. Because confidence isn't the absence of doubt, it's the ability to act in spite of it. When we strip it down to psychology, confidence is simply self-trust. And trust can only exist where there's consistency. The habit of comparison destroys consistency because it constantly shifts your goalposts. One day you're doing great, the next day someone else outshines you and suddenly you feel like you've failed. Your brain never gets to rest in stability. It never gets to build that quiet sense of I'm okay where I am. And so this hidden habit, this constant mental comparison, isn't just about envy or jealousy. It's about identity confusion. It blurs the boundary between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be. Over time, your sense of self fragments. You forget what truly makes you happy because you're too busy chasing what looks impressive. That's not self-improvement. That's self-abandonment dressed as ambition. When you start to understand this, you begin to see how subtle and powerful this habit really is. It's not loud. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It hides in everyday thoughts, in quiet moments, in harmless scrolls. But those whispers accumulate, shaping how you see yourself, what risks you take, what dreams you pursue, and ultimately, how much you trust your own worth. So, let's close the loop. Remember that whisper we talked about at the start, the one that says, "You're not good enough"? It's not your true voice. It's the echo of a habit, and like any habit, you can unlearn it. The next time you feel that inner critic rising, don't fight it. Just notice it, smile, and remind yourself, I'm not behind. I'm becoming. If you learned something new about how the human mind works and want to keep building your emotional intelligence, hit subscribe, and let's keep growing your mind together.